very warm welcome. Thank you. Well, we're really happy to be here too. It's been a warm welcome since this morning, so really happy. So we're going to talk about solutions journalism and what it is exactly and how we are presenting it and promoting. I'm Nina and I'm French, so my English is not perfect. I'm sorry. I'm sure you understand. And I've been first involved in NGOs, and then I worked as a journalist in Russia for 5 years, and now I'm working for the Solutions Journalism Network, which is based in New York for a year and a half now, from France, and I'm the European ambassador of the network. And my colleague Samantha here flew from New York to Moldova.
But she's not jet lagging because she was in Italy first.
Yes.
So my name is Samantha McCann. I'm the Director of Communities at the Solutions Journalism Network. I work closely with David, the Ashoka Fellow, as well as about a team of 20, about 15 in New York and about 7 or 8 across the US. Nina is actually our only representative outside of the US, so she has her hands full. I come from a background of policy. I was working in kind of environmental policy research, criminal justice policy, and as well as a bit of journalism. And I see solutions journalism as the intersection of policy and journalism. It's journalism you can use. It's policy that everyone has access to. So thank you all for being here. I feel really privileged to be able to do this in English. So thank you for that as well. So I'll kick it back to you.
So to start, I would like you to look at these headlines. Is it on? No. Have a look at these headlines. So why I'm showing this, it's because if you take these headlines separately, if you read all these articles separately, there is nothing wrong about them. It's information that people need. But if you add them all together and if you think that it's actually only what we care about, it gives you an incomplete and biased vision of the reality. It's not the world we live in. It's not only that. It's not only problems. We also have people since ever that try to resolve problems. And talking also about them, it means giving a more accurate and complete vision of reality. Now, just let me ask, are there any journalists in the room? Just news consumers, or news consumers. Okay. What else? Non-profit employees. Okay.
Government news consumer. Yeah, news consumer.
We all.
So who here remembers Ebola? 20? Yeah, I've heard this 3 hours ago. 2014, Ebola outbreak in sub-Saharan Africa. What do you remember about it? Shout out if you remember any kind of details or general trends about the coverage. It was what?
It was big.
It was big. Yeah.
There was fear that it's going to come to Europe because people travel. So that, it happened in this wild world, and We were afraid that someone would bring it to our safe home.
What made you think that?
And there was no way to stop it.
Yeah. And there was no effective way to inform people about, there where the Ebola was happening. There was no way to inform people how they can be safer.
Mm-hmm. Lots of casualties, lots of fear. Covered pretty incessantly for about 4 months. Does anyone in this room know how Ebola was stopped? Okay, so it was covered intensely in this kind of fear-based way for 3 months, and then it just stops. We never hear about it again. The crisis ended, right? The Refugee Crisis, 2015. What do you remember about it? Specifically that summer, those kind of 6 months. What kind of news coverage did you see? What kind of details do you remember?
In Poland it was mixed. It was very positive that we had to help those people, and later, many months later, it was all negative. It became part of Polish politics. And it's still today. So it's basically we live it all the time.
Yeah. So just very politicized.
Yeah, at first it was very nuanced, I can imagine, but then as time progressed, and that's my colleague said, with politics coming into play, the narrative changed, and I think it's changed in the majority of media throughout.
Okay. Does anyone here know how Germany is integrating the 1.2 million refugees? 900,000 of which came in 2015?
The struggles that you get in Poland, I mean, I'm not sure if everybody agrees, but you tend to see the bad cases, as in there is no integration, Germany refuses to accept any more migrants, the narrative again it's biased to a degree, and I heard positive stories as well from my friends living in Germany, but on the other hand you can hear people who are afraid of going out on the streets and stuff like that, so the migrants following. But then again, I don't know the details, for instance, I'm kind of interested in the subject anyways.
Wouldn't it be interesting? So the refugee crisis in the US was not impacted at all by this. It was covered every day, front page news for maybe 2 months, and then we heard about it for maybe another 2 months. Not front page, but it was there. And we haven't heard about it since. Maybe it's not so relevant in the US, but here you would think, how is Germany doing it? How are they integrating it? Is it successful? What kind of experiences are the refugees going through? Another example. Did most of you hear about the shooting in Las Vegas last fall? So 58 people were shot and killed. Hundreds were wounded. One of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. Definitely in recent history. And after about 2 weeks, it was completely gone from the narrative, from mainstream news coverage. There was actually a study done that showed the percentage of mass media coverage it was for a short period of time, and it was almost never mentioned after about 14 days. So,
what's your point?
That is coming in and out.
So we go from crisis to absence, and from crisis to absence, and from crisis to absence, and we never hear about anything after it is kind of this a crisis.
We wait for the new one.
We wait for a new one, exactly.
The situation is that anyhow, since I don't know how long ago, there's some million of people entering Europe per year, and this hasn't changed so much, but finally media decided to address this crisis. The politicians started making of it their show, but for you, the migration crisis is exactly the same for a long time. Yes.
Okay.
Finally, some racist tendencies started.
Okay.
To develop migration.
So, solutions journalism is an antidote to that. It is something we propose to make the news cycle more complete, to make it more accurate. As Nina said, everything we saw, those negative headlines, were accurate, but it's not the whole picture. And so solutions journalism proposes a more complete picture of the world, both the problems and the people responding to those problems.
So we're going to give a few examples on reporting on this kind of problems. Going back to the Ebola crisis, there was this reporting in October 2014 by The Economist on how Nigeria dealt with the Ebola outbreak. And it's interesting because Nigeria had a response, a political response among others that could have benefited to the other countries around. Like if the coverage of this response would have been broader, then more people knew about it and maybe have lessons from that. And it's also interesting because when reporting on solutions in solutions journalism, we want to give information about what was the response, but also what was the context that made the response fail or work. And in this case, well, in Nigeria first, we had only one people who got contaminated entered the country, so it was really easy to track. And you had lots of money coming from the US really quickly, which was not the case in other countries. And you had a really powerful program from the government with on communication, so communicating between the people who talk to the people who were contaminated. And that's the part of the solution that could have benefited to the others. On Germany, that's also reporting from The Economist, so how Germany is integrating its refugees and how it seems to be managing, while we expected in Europe that they were going to fail, like it's going to be a chaos. So this reporting from The Economist is about what was the response in Germany, so what did they do when people arrived, what was the priorities of integration, was it work, education, how did it fail, what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths. That gives also new key of understanding how we can deal with this kind of crisis. And this is a story by Fiscal on how different cities in Italy responded to the earthquake, like how they rebuilt their cities. And it's 4 examples in different cities and how these cities responded differently from another, and how it sometimes failed, how it sometimes succeeded, but anyway, it's also good lessons to keep for the future. So what is solutions journalism? Solutions journalism, as we see, is a good coverage of a response to a problem and how it happened. So giving concrete details on how the response was implemented and concrete details that help us understand how we could maybe do it in our country or our country. It provides evidence of impact, so looking at effectiveness, not just good intentions. That's a really important part because you have to report on a solution that is already existing. So your news in solutions journalism is today how people are responding to problems and what's the evidence. It produces insight that can help others respond to. So as I was saying, solutions journalism gives you a new understanding of the problem at its base, and also key understanding on how the solution could work. And that gives you a global new knowledge about the problem and the solutions themselves. It points out limitations and weaknesses, risks. It gives the challenges that were faced during the implementation of the solution. That's really important because we don't want to do positive news. We're actually reporting, investigating on how people respond to problems. So the Solutions Journalism Network was founded by David Borchstein and Tina Rosenberg. They are both American reporters, and they are based in New York. But as Sam said, I am representing the Solutions Journalism Network in Europe since a year and a half. So I train journalists, newsrooms, on how to integrate solutions journalism in their reporting. It's an addition, it's not an alternative, so it's just one more tool that the journalist can use. We don't want people just to stop talking about problems. It's really on how, when it's appropriate, they can also talk about solutions. And we are here in Poland, and we are going to Czech Republic tomorrow, and she's going to Austria afterwards to launch the Solutions Journalism in project in the CE.
Another thing we like to start out with when we're talking about solutions journalism is what not to do. Because the number one criticism we get when we say we're talking about solutions journalism, people are like, you're talking about advocacy. You're trying to sell us something. You're doing a PR piece. And so we've laid out the typology of things we're not talking about and how to strengthen them in solutions reporting. So solution stories aren't about heroizing someone, so holding up some individual who's doing really good work and not being very critical about it, just saying, isn't it nice, they've done something good, they're a wonderful person. Solution journalism stories have characters, but it's about what they're doing. It's not about who they are. It's about it's about the work that they're doing and the response that they're involved in. So this story looks like it might be a hero story. He survived Ebola, isn't that kind of a story that sells itself? But it was really, he wasn't mentioned until a third of the way through the story. And it was about the work, the processes that he was implementing in his clinic to prevent the spread of Ebola. So it was about how that success story worked. Solution stories are not kind of magic, what do we say, magic wand, silver bullet, the thing that solves everything. If you look at the first sentence here, it says, sometimes a soccer ball is more than just a ball. Sometimes it's a lifesaver. So nothing will ever be the answer. And we are probably misnamed even. It shouldn't be called Solutions Journalism Network, because solution is so political, it implies that something is the answer. And that's not what we're saying. We're just saying this is one way to respond to a problem. So solutions journalism stories tone down a bit. Looking at, is it working in some cases? Is it not working in other cases? Here are some weaknesses to it. You're not proposing something as the answer. Solutions journalism stories are not, how many of you get press releases in your email or your newsroom gets them? So you're not just taking that press release and putting a new lead on it. It's, you're not doing PR for organizations. You might get the idea from a press release and say, well, actually, this is a cool organization to cover, But then in that solution story, you were focusing on both the pros and the cons. What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? Philadelphia was the first city in the US to enact a soda tax. We have an obesity problem, and people have associated consumption of soda with that. So they're taxing soda, and it's working. People are drinking less soda. But because they're drinking less soda companies need fewer employees because they're not selling as much, and so they're cutting jobs. And so that's a very interesting and important thing to mention in a story like that. This is, I think, the most often what people think we're talking about. No, we're not. Solutions, journals, and stories are not about theories. They're not about things that might happen, or might be, or things that might work well. They're about what has already happened to date. So what happened yesterday and last month and last year, and what is the evidence we know to prove that that is working or not? And sometimes it's only partially working. So instead of looking at this kind of proposal, this brief advocates the creative use of media to provide youth with positive messages, blah, blah, blah. How about looking at what Iceland already did to almost eliminate teen drinking? They had a huge problem with it, and they beat it. So what did they do right, and what can we learn from them? Instead of coming up with a new idea. These stories are not afterthoughts. They're not something you put in the last paragraph of a 2,000, 10,000 word piece on the problem, but rather it's a core part of the story. So this was a documentary about the American criminal justice system. Very expensive, not particularly effective, and it was really exposing a lot of the problems. And about the last 5 minutes, it looked at how people were responding to those problems, like, here's the problem, and some people are responding to it. How about we take it as the whole frame? Instead of just saying we have a problem, say, look at what Finland has done. They approach kind of criminal justice reform in prison this way. Look at what Germany does. Look at what another country does. And finally, almost finally, these are not activism stories. You are not endorsing solutions. You are not responses. You are not saying this is the way. You are not, asking people to click on a campaign to donate money or endorse a politician, or you are just reporting a story. You're reporting what's happening. You're reporting the news. So instead of doing a story, this organization launched a campaign to tackle food waste, the solutions journalism story would be, look at what France already did to become a leader in this field, and what can we learn from that?
You can invent the solution on yourself, or you should rather search for a solution found in elsewhere.
Yeah, it's the second, it's the latter, looking for something that's already been done. I don't think this one needs explaining. But these aren't fluffy pieces. These are rigorous investigative reportage on how people are responding to problems. So
it eventually makes people feel good, but it's not the objective.
So just don't do them. But if you really want to do them, if you're in love with cuddly things, a more rigorous piece might be how therapy dogs are aiding the emotional growth of students. Maybe still a little on the lighter side, the less rigorous side. But if you're taking kind of the productive frame, it can be okay. So any questions on that first bit? What solutions journalism is?
You have to defend it. I don't understand why they attack you, because you have to defend the social journalism as if it was something bad to undertake, to write. No, everything is under strange way.
It's political.
It's political in the sense that they give some solutions that they liberal, basically. They like liberalism.
Right.
I do too, but it doesn't matter. So So it has to be in a way.
It doesn't have to be, I disagree.
Okay, it is. To a certain extent, it is always political.
Yes. And we were talking about this earlier today. I think it can have great power in depoliticizing things because we might all agree on the problem, but we disagree on what the response should be depending on our varying political ideologies. But I think it helps in showing that if X country is, achieving good results with an ideology you don't necessarily agree with, maybe that will bring people a little closer together. But, yeah.
But could you give some examples? For example, I know the New York Times is a good solution to journalism. Why is it not good?
They have the most stories in the database we're going to talk about in a few minutes. They've done the most, but a lot of that is because David and Tina, the co-founders, do a weekly solutions journalism piece. So there are 600 some stories.
Can I just, I guess it's worth to mention that it's hard to say that there is some newsroom that covers only the solutions journalism because it's not the point. It's one of the approaches to be taken. So there is never the newsroom that it's not the newsroom that it's fully into solutions journalism. It's just the redaction that use this tool when it's needed in their opinion.
You come up here.
No, but I guess it's to build on what you said.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to understand what's the difference between what I think about when I think about a good piece of journalism.
But okay, so it may just be good journalism.
To what extent this is the same what you're talking about? Again and again, the same question.
Do you feel like you see a lot of solution stories in your daily media diet?
Not advocacy stories, but I see lots of stories that are not on the internet. They are in newspapers, like, for example, long teachers' stories, like in the New York Times and The Economist, places like this. But of course, these are not news stories. These are not stories that people simply they are not fed by those stories. They do not get them every day. They can read them on the weekends, for example. They need time. They need lots of. It's hard to do. I mean, it's much more complicated, and people have attention spans pretty low. So that's the problem.
We're going to get to a lot of those things, I think. And if you still have hesitations at the end,
okay.
Please speak
No,
up.
I'm just asking.
Yeah. Okay, so why does this matter? How many of you saw the movie Spotlight? Okay, so almost all of you. The power of Spotlight and of that investigation by the Boston Globe is that was journalism working. That was journalism working. It did its function. So Martin Barron was the editor of the Boston Globe at the time. He was leading that investigation. He's now the editor of the Washington Post. And I like this quote because he underscores what a lot of journalists see their function in society as. And that's holding power to account. Holding the most powerful to account is what we're supposed to do. Exposing wrongdoing, shining light on people doing bad behavior, and it stopped. It worked. It had an impact. This is another example of kind of accountability journalism. You do an investigation into bad behavior. This is the governor, or the former governor, I should say, of Illinois. He was caught, exposed, trying to sell President Obama's Senate seat to the highest bidder. The story came out, he's in prison now. That's journalism working. Another example, Sepp Blatter from FIFA. Exposed wrongdoing, corruption, he is no longer head of FIFA. Okay, that is journalism working. That's the holding power to account. But it doesn't always work that way. So, a lot of you might have this question. We're not looking for publications necessarily to only do solutions journalism, because a lot of the time that doesn't It's not called for. You couldn't do solutions pieces to these. There's no solution to non-corruption. Well, there might be kind of a nuanced thing, but it's like,
because you can treat the story, because before you said that telling a story about somebody is not social journalism, but then if you want to see it in a broader context, this story can be pictured to a bigger problem that affects the world, and it could be also used as a part of social article, the news item.
It could be, yeah. But these stories were particularly effective, I think, because it was about bad behavior needing to stop. It wasn't about kind of a whole system. It wasn't about education or environmental pollution or crime and violence. It was about Rob Blagojevich, the governor of Illinois, needing to stop trying to sell the Senate seat. And that's a pretty easy thing to put political pressure on people who need to do that. But before you do that, people need to know something is a problem. Before you do solutions journalism, they need to know it's a problem, and people need to already be responding to it. It can't be a new problem that maybe everyone knows of and no one has really responded to yet. You couldn't have a solution story to the refugee crisis in Germany in early 2015 because it wasn't a problem yet. So I'm going to pass it off to Nina again to talk about when solutions journalism can actually increase the accountability function, enhance it, make solutions journalism hold power to account in a different, stronger way.
By this story, we also want to highlight that investigative story can be solutions journalism. Often, when we talk about solutions journalism, the first reaction is to go like, oh, it's positive news and it's superficial, and it's not our role as a journalist to talk about what's working, but it's our role to point out problems and just make people aware of these problems. And so I want to tell you about this toxic negative story because you can see how investigative journalism and solutions journalism can actually work together. So Cleveland is a city in the US, and as many other cities, they were facing a lead poison problem. So that's lead in the paintings in the homes from the 70s, and it directly has an impact on the health of kids and pregnant women first. And so the traditional role of solutions journalism says you have to highlight this problem, and that's what they did. That's what we call the watchdog role of solutions of journalists. So they made this map, and you can see where in Cleveland they have the most lead poisoning problem, and they concluded that the minorities were the most impacted. But they thought it wasn't enough, because actually the people in Cleveland knew that for decades. And for decades they knew that they had a lead poisoning problems, and it was often in the front pages, but the conversation was not going anywhere anymore. Like the outrage was there, and they would stop listening and stop reading because they knew, but they felt that nothing could be done about it.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
Sorry. So this is a story from 2015. The first paragraph here says, in 2006, Cleveland City Council passed a law aimed at making landlords voluntarily prove their homes were safe from lead-based paint that continues to cause brain damage and lifelong health problems for small children. 9 years later, not one has done so. Okay, so for 9 years, they knew this was a problem. They knew this was a problem long before 2006. And here's the problem, and here's the problem, and here's the problem, and nothing was happening as of 2015.
So what the main dealer, the newspaper in Cleveland, decided to do is turn into a guide dog. So not only highlighting the problem, but looking at other cities facing the same problem with the same context, and that had taken successful measures. And they looked at what were the goal of these measures, what was happening, who was trying to do what. And then they compared this between successful cities and Cleveland, what was done in successful cities and what was done in Cleveland, and what was the difference, to understand what was the gap between what was working and not working.
So this is solution to the box, is it?
No, wait, on the web. And that led them to the conclusion that one city was particularly doing well addressing this problem, and this city was Rochester. So they did 10 pages reporting on how Rochester addressed this problem, how it was successful, what they did exactly, concretely, and what Cleveland could learn from that. And the impact of this story, after it got published, was that the Cleveland Health Department director and 3 or 4 deputy commissioners fired or resigned. City meetings led inspection staff from 3 to 7. City passed plan that proactively inspects rental homes for the first time, modeled on the program highlighted in the series. The state figures the city unless it complied with the list of reforms, and published a list of bad homes with warning signs on affected homes. That just shows you that solutions journalism can have the same impact as investigative journalism, putting pressure on the politicians on saying, well, here is the same problem and they are doing something and it's working, so why aren't you? 2 years after the Rochester story was published, they published another report on their website saying, okay, 2 years after this story, we have done that, and this still remains to be done. So just tell you that just don't finish with that story, they're still reporting on it.
So another example, this is from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in Wisconsin. They did an investigation into the mental health care system in Milwaukee. It was very expensive. It was highly dependent on urgency care, so just kind of cycling in and out of the ER or prison. And instead of just exposing the problem, at the same time, the reporter said, look at these 2 other cities who are responding to the same issue. Look at what Houston has done. Look at what this town in Belgium has done to respond to mental health issues, and what might we learn from that?
I'll do it for you.
Okay. So this was the Houston story. Immediately after that series came out, Milwaukee abolished political control in the mental health policy. And the new budget provided for a large increase in mental health care. And the reporter, Mike Kissinger, says that the solution stories in the series were essential to the story having impact. Because instead of just saying, this is a problem, and we are stuck with it, you're saying, this place has already responded to the issue, so why can't we? Same newspaper reported on a nearby city in the U.S. how they had responded to youth violence. After that story came out, the mayor dedicated 2 new positions to address youth violence, and they're currently implementing the exact same solution that the reporter had reported on. They just kind of took the cookie-cutter approach, and they're doing it. Seattle Times Education Lab is our longest-running partnership, now in its 5th year with the Seattle Times. David Boardman, if any of you saw him, he was the former editor of the Seattle Times and kind of spearheaded this, was our initial partner. And they've been reporting for years on both the problems of public education and also how people are responding to those. And so we've seen a story here, instead of just expelling or suspending students who are truant, so who aren't showing up for class regularly, they make them report to these community truancy boards. Another story they did is that suspending kids doesn't actually fix bad behavior. They also exposed that a lot of the schools had been suspending Black and Latino kids at much higher rates than Caucasian kids. After the suspension story came out, and they also found examples of who didn't have that and where it was working better, the school board declared a 1-year moratorium. They ended suspensions for a year. And the state legislature also passed a law requiring every school district in the state to implement those community truancy boards. This is a success story. And the legislature said, we knew this was a problem. And we knew that this program was working. We had known about it for years. We talked about it. But after this story came out, there was political pressure from the readers. They said, why aren't we doing this? Why isn't this something that is everywhere? And so they made it. They made it everywhere. So we look at solutions journalism as the transition from unavoidable to acceptable. I'm sorry, to unacceptable. So this is something we can't avoid, this is a problem we're stuck with, to it's unacceptable that we haven't dealt with this yet, because they are, and they are, and they are. And every problem, okay, not every problem, I'll tone it down. Most problems have been dealt with by other communities, by other cities, by other countries, counties, neighborhoods. And so what can we learn from those people already doing that?
And so after the first stories were published, the Seattle Times made a survey, and they're actually still doing a survey on how the readers reacted to this solution story. And so here are a few examples. 62% of the readers agree that the story changed the way they think about the topic, which I think is really important because it shows that the conversation went to another level. 50% of parents and 84% of educators said they were likely to talk to someone else about the Education Lab project. There were 102% more page views, 180% time on page. That's interesting because usually they are long stories. It shows that they knew they would have new information at the end. 230% more social shares, and the user.
That's for solutions you cite them, or just if you might exceed?
It was for the education lab.
Education lab. Oh, sorry.
And the user were returning on the education lab was 64%. And I want to mention they also had a new advertiser. Like the Alaska Airlines said, oh, we want to be on the education lab pages. So they earn new revenues. That's another story. It's a year-long project with 9 stories published, and there were about 48,000 characters, and they were nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. It's about how, so it's the Chatham-Hungary version. Did I say it right?
Almost.
So the economy was booming, and they looked at how some organizations were responding to income inequality. That's the editor from the Chatham-Hungary Times Free Press, and she said we received more unsolicited input from the community on this than anything else we've done. So they got new responses and new reactions from their community of readers. And the reporter said no one in the newsrooms can read the civility of the Facebook comments.
No one has ever said that before in history.
I think they didn't expect it would have this impact, but well, she's saying it mirrored something kind of exciting is happening with this, because the trust between caregivers and the readers can be rebuilt.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I have a language question.
Sure.
So civility of the Facebook comments means they were nice.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I said no.
So there's no hate speech.
Yes.
And even when people would disagree, I think it was in a more constructive way. That's another project based in Philadelphia. And it's called the Re-Entry Project. It's 18 newsrooms reporting on what happens to the people when they get out of prison and how they can be reintegrated in life. It was such a success. It was a year-long project. It was such a success that they actually decided to go for another year on another topic. But this was in 2017 era.
And I should note, these are newsrooms that are, David Boardman is in Philadelphia now. He's the dean of the Temple Journalism School. And the newsrooms in Philadelphia were kind of notoriously competitive, always trying to get to the story first. And that competition remains, but they are now collaborating over how to make their community stronger. And I think solutions journalism has the potential to bring previous competitors together, at least on this one issue, and show how to strengthen the community, how to improve it.
And so if you want to know more about possible solution stories and how they are framed or what the topics can be, we have a database of over 3,000 stories, solution stories, that we collected, and you can search by issue area, success factors, location, type of medium, author, length of the story, what else? What did I miss?
Scope.
Issue area.
Scope.
I carry on. So what do we do concretely? And then I'm going to be really quick so we can have time to talk. We do newsroom partnerships as you saw, like the Education Lab was our first partnership. We train directly into newsrooms to support ideas that will come from a newsroom on possible solutions. We have an online learning platform, I'll show you after, and we do community building, so we try to share maximum learning and try to collaborate on, so that journalists who do solutions journalism can learn from each other. That's how the hub looks like, and you actually can register for free. And you can submit your solution story to be in the solution story tracker. You can find your community and see if an event is happening next to you. You can get trained. So that's how our learning lab looks like. Again, it's free, and you have access to the toolkits we've done. So the basic toolkit is now in French, Spanish, English, and it will be soon in Polish, Czech, and Russian. And then we have other guides on based on how to do solutions journalism about education, violence, health. We are going to soon have a guide for G schools, so how to teach solutions journalism in G schools.
And are any of you editors? We're having an editor's guide coming too. How to implement this as an editor in your newsroom.
Yeah. What I want to say to end this presentation is we're not trying to have a revolution in the media. We're not trying to build a movement. It's more like an evolution, natural evolution of journalism. You have tools you can use. Sometimes it's appropriate to use investigative journalism, sometimes it's not. Well, we appropriate as a new tool to cover how we respond to problems. others. So, thank you.
So we're happy to take any questions.